Well, it's good to be here. Good to see this bunch of people. I think it's the most people I've ever seen in here. So it's an indication that you're doing something right. That song, thank you for that song. I'm not familiar with it. It's probably the most famous 4 words that Vonnegut ever spoke. And it was good to hear the song. I've got more things in my book than I thought I had. I'll start with a quote. Nationalism is a brilliant, fatal psychological poison. It perfectly trains the starving peasant to violently hate the starving peasant on the other side of an invisible line, completely ignoring the bloated king who deliberately starved them both. Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher of realism. Christian nationalism is doubly fatal, doubly poisonous. Christian nationalism is the greatest threat to our liberty that we face today, by far. No foreign enemy, no terrorist cell erodes the fundamental freedoms guaranteed by our Constitution more than Christian nationalism. Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith, an avowed Christian nationalist, recently declared that he hates Islam. Just a little quick jump to Vonnegut right quick, if I can find it quickly. I think I can. Maybe I can't. Well, basically what he said was, if you hate Islam, hate Muslims, try doing long division with Roman numerals. Because our numbers, of course, came from the Arabs and the Arabic. The Muslim population in Indiana is estimated at approximately 41,000 to 70,000. While small, the community is well established with over 45 mosque congregations operating across the state. The community has a diverse demographic makeup consisting of African Americans, Arab Americans, and South Asian Americans. I hope the ignorance and bigotry of Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith does not inspire another shooter to take aim at our Muslim friends. Many years ago, when we lived in Bloomington, well, maybe it was even, when was the mosque attacked in Bloomington? I can't remember. We weren't in the teepee at the time, I think. We lived for 5 years in a teepee with our 2 kids, and so I get confused on where we were and when. But our mosque in Bloomington was firebombed, and the Unitarian Church, we marched from the Unitarian Church all the way across town in 90-degree heat after our Sunday morning service. We had lines of people. The Catholic Church up the street joined us. The Presbyterians joined us. We literally had a huge march all through Bloomington on behalf of our Muslim friends. And I think it's imperative that Unitarian Universalists stand up and speak the truth to power in Indiana. This is the anniversary of the Stonewall riots. If you remember Stonewall riots, when gay people decided they had had enough in New York. Little news, and with the authoritarian government that we have right now, which is Christian nationalist, Pete Hegseth has wiped 180 faiths off the Pentagon official list, the largest religious purge in modern military history. The memo dropped May 20 under the signature of Anthony Tata, the Pentagon personnel chief, once pulled from a Senate hearing over his Islamophobic post. He announced this thing. It erases atheists, humanists, pagans, Druids, Wiccans, heathens, Asutru, Unitarian Universalist, Deist, Spiritualist, and dozens more spiritual leaders and it takes away their right, a soldier's right, man or woman, Christian, Buddhist, whatever they claim, they are given dog tags. And if they are killed in battle or wounded in battle, they are given a minister of what it says on their dog tag. So Unitarian Universalist chaplains in the military now have been stripped of their office, of their stripes, and denied the right to serve Unitarian soldiers. And as I said, there was like 80 different ones, 180 faiths that he got. I didn't know there were that many faiths in America, but I guess there is. And I guess he knew there was. What survives in our military, according to Pete Hegseth? Every flavor of Christianity, plus Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, and Sikhism. And funny how it is, the axe never falls on the faith that Hegseth and his pastor friends approve. About his pastor friends, Doug Wilson, the Idaho Christian nationalist who supports repealing women's right to vote and believes homosexuality should be a crime, led a worship service in the Pentagon at Hegseth's invitation, broadcast live over the department's internal TV channels. Hegseth has rebranded the Department of Defense as the Department of War and declared that military chaplains are first and foremost called and ordained by God. That is the man writing the rules for which God counts. A serving Army chaplain who spoke anonymously to the military in military.com said the new list violates the Constitution he swore to defend. A combat veteran, as a Wiccan priest, Druid, and Asutragosi, warned that stripping minority codes abandons traumatized service members inside the very chaplains they are meant to serve them. And Mikey Weinstein, who runs the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, on behalf of the more than 100,000 troops that are part of that, called the new list a middle finger to the United States Constitution. I wonder if the acting Attorney General might try to do the same kind of surgical removal of many prison chaplains. I won't be surprised if they do. As most of you know, I've served as minister, or some of you know, I've served as minister of record for Chad Fulks, who is on Terre Haute federal death row. He's actually been Biden commuted those sentences, so he's not available to kill right now. But I've served him for 20 years, going to a federal prison every month. And I also served Corey Johnson, who was one of the most remarkable men I've ever met in my life. He could not read or write. He was in solitary confinement for 29 years without a visitor. And when Donald Trump was on his murder spree in 2021, in which he executed 13 people, Corey Johnson was going to be one of the last 2 or 3. And I asked, we protested every one of those things, and at one of those protests, I asked a lawyer friend of mine to find out if they all had ministers. There were 4 left to do that year. And we found out that they didn't. We got a Muslim friend of mine to attend a Muslim prisoner. Sisters of Providence provided a nun for a woman who was executed. I volunteered for Corey Johnson. And I learned that he had been in solitary confinement for 29 years without a visitor. And I've been in solitary confinement. It drove me crazy in just a day or so. But 29 years, unable to read or write. And I called, his lawyer called me from Washington, D.C., and he said, I understand you're willing to go with him and into the execution chamber. And I said, yeah. I said, I need to see him. I need to visit him, get as much time as I can with him. I said, am I going to be able to talk to him? you'd think he might be eating flies or something. He said, you're going to meet one of the most remarkable human beings you've ever met. He was called the Gentle Giant. 29 years in solitary confinement, 29 years in federal prison, and never written up for an infraction by a guard. I've been written up for infractions by guards. I've never heard of that before. They called him the Gentle Giant. All the men on the row loved him. The staff loved him. The guards taking him to the execution chamber were weeping. This is one of the most quality human beings I've ever known. I read to him on the morning before his execution. We had several hours. I took the book, The Velveteen Rabbit, with me. Anybody read The Velveteen Rabbit? If you haven't, get it. If you have children, you must get it. If you have grandchildren, you must give it. Every child needs to hear The Velveteen Rabbit. That's enough of that. But I took it to read to him, and there's a point in there that says the rabbit wants to be real. And he's talking to the old stuffed horse, who's the oldest member of the nursery. And he says, what's it mean to be real? Does it mean that, to wind up to us? Because the toy soldiers were always making fun of the rabbit because he couldn't move. He was just a stuffed rabbit. He said, does it mean having arms and legs that move? Does it mean things sticking out? That's all. And the old skin horse says, no, that's not what real is. Being real, it happens to you when you're loved for a long, long time. Loves you unconditionally. You become real. And once you become real, you can never be unreal again. So I read that to Corey Johnson. And I wasn't planning on telling this story today, but I'm telling it to you. And he couldn't, I told him that if he wanted to dictate to me his last words, because he couldn't read or write, that I would read them for him in the death chamber. And he dictated them to me. His first words that he dictated to me were, I want to apologize to the families of my victims. I know your pain is great. They were in a room. They would have been able to hear those words. But I wrote it out, and I was going to read it for him. And he said, I want to apologize to the hurt I caused their families. I want to say that I would have told you that a long time ago, but I didn't know how. So when I walked into the death chamber, after my first meeting with one of the executioners of the team and asked me what I wanted to do, I said, well, I want to read his last words. He dictated them to me this morning, and he can't read or write and wants me to read them. As far as I knew, that was going to be okay, but I go into the chamber, and the really radical man, a real Nazi kind of person running the show, asked me what I was going to do, and I said, well, I'm going to say a prayer. I want to bless his body after he's dead, and I want to read his last words. He said, you can't read them, he has to read them. And he's strapped down, he can only move his fingers, he can't move his head. I said, he doesn't read, and how can he read? How could he read them anyway where he's at? And we argued for a few minutes. I kept saying, he needs, I want to read these. And he finally threatened to take me out of the death chamber if I tried to read them. And I really believe that had, the other thing about the Velveteen Rabbit, you become real when you're loved. You become real when you're loved. And I also taught him that in the African tradition, you're not dead until your name is forgotten. That's an African tradition from way back. You're not dead until your name is forgotten. And I told Corey, I'm going to make sure your name is never forgotten. At the first part of his things, he said, I want you not to worry about me. I'm okay. I'm at peace. Remember these names. And he named every one of his victims. They didn't get to, the victims' families didn't get to hear that because they wouldn't let me read it. And when finally, after over an hour and a half of standing, just 6 feet from him, was not allowed to touch him ever in the hours. I had about 30 hours with him, but at that time we didn't have contact visits. Since then, I've sued the federal government and won the right to have contact visits with the people on death row for any minister. But I had never touched him before then. I stood in silence, waiting for well over an hour for the final courts to decide, and occasionally talking to Corey. But when they finally said, the guy opened the door to the back of the little room we're in and said, "There are no impediments." What a bureaucratic word. There are no impediments for murder. And so the skinhead Nazi leader grabbed a microphone and screamed out like a carnival barker, "Let the execution begin." And the victims' families across the wall, behind what's supposed to be a soundproof glass, but it's not, stood and cheered like it was a touchdown at the Super Bowl. Had they heard the names of their children, their sons, had they heard Corey's apology, I don't think they would have done that. And then the execution began while they're screaming and hollering and whistling. And Corey's brother, who he had not seen in 29 years, we raised the money to bring his family in. They had never been able to afford to visit him. And Corey's family was in a room behind me, his brother and sister-in-law. And they were told in their room that when they were put in there, that if they made any noise, they'd be taken out immediately. Corey's brother didn't listen. He stood up and started hollering, "I love you, bro. I love you, bro. I love you, bro." And he did that for over 20 minutes. It's the only thing that kept me standing. We are living in a country born on independence. We are celebrating our 250th anniversary. And this is what we are doing in the United States of America. After the execution, after Corey was declared dead, I was allowed to bless his body. And one of the things he told me that morning that we spent before the execution, he said, "My only regret is I've never really accomplished anything." He took the general GED 29 times and flunked it every time. He wanted that GED, and I wanted to do that. So when I blessed his body, I said, "Corey, you were complaining that you'd never accomplished anything." But I said, with the dignity that you have come in here, with the dignity that you have died, with the dignity that you have lived, maybe this murder will help us stop this madness. Maybe you've accomplished a lot. And then I turned to the leader of the corps after blessing his body, I turned to him and said, "As a minister, I feel obligated to advise you to find another line of work before you lose your soul." And he screamed at me and kicked me out of the execution chamber, called over the microphone, "Take the minister out." The black man who I'd met with before was part of the team, and he was weeping himself. And he walked me to the van and said, "Thank you very much. And I hope he never has to do that again." And I don't know why that came up today, except to say that we're dealing with a fascist Christian nationalist government. We are in more danger now than we have ever been as a nation, ever. And I believe it's time for churches to take the lead. It's time for ministers, it's time for Christians, Buddhists, atheists, anybody. It's time for human beings to begin to take the lead and say, "No, not on my watch, not on my time, not in my nation on its birthday will I allow this to go on without speaking out, standing up, marching, screaming, hollering, whatever we have to do." I encourage you to make a commitment to be, I don't like the word soldier, but to be a human being struggling to protect this nation, because we are on the verge. We have a president who loves Viktor Orban. Vance actually went to promote his campaign, and thank goodness the Hungarian people stood up and said, hell no, you ain't doing this anymore. So that shows us it can be done. But it's going to take people on their feet. It's going to take people marching. It's going to take people speaking. It's going to take people registering people to vote, standing up and saying no. I never got to meet Kurt Vonnegut. He was, his book, Slaughterhouse-Five, which I brought with me and was going to share some parts of it, but probably won't get to it. But I always wanted to meet him, but I'm kind of shy about going to see famous people and never made it to see him. Glenda actually saw him speak at IU one year, and I was driving truck and couldn't be there. But I always wanted to meet Kurt Vonnegut because his book, Slaughterhouse-Five, changed my life drastically. I was a little holiness Christian teenage preacher when I went to college to get a 2-year preaching degree at a holiness college. And in my second year, I picked up Slaughterhouse-Five, and it changed my life. It changed my life. I used to dream of going into the armed services, and then I realized what war really is from Slaughterhouse-Five. There is an antidote to Christian nationalism. I think Kurt Vonnegut is the best author Indiana ever produced and the best philosopher Indiana ever produced. And actually, had I known that Howard Zinn had told him about me, and he responded by saying, that man's a holy clown like Abby Hoffman and Joe Heller. If I'd known that, I'd have walked over hot coals for 10 miles to get to him. But he died before I got that opportunity. But I encourage you to read Vonnegut. I encourage you to read Slaughterhouse-Five if you haven't. I suspect a lot of you have. It's, I think, one of the greatest American novels ever written. When I was a minister at the Unitarian Church in Bloomington for 14 years, something like that, the most toughest sermon I ever preached that I got the most kickback is entitled, Why I'm a Socialist. And the economics professors in our church would come out, oh, you're not a socialist, and we'd have a lot of good discussions. They loved me as a minister. They thought I was ignorant as an economist. But the fact is, we have opportunities now to change this system if people act, if people stand up and resist. And anybody can look at the record of capitalism and take it very seriously as any moral way to deal with our economics needs to take another look at it. We now have a trillionaire on the planet. We can't afford them. We have children dying of hunger. We can't afford trillionaires. And of course, Indiana's filled. Indiana used to be a seedbed, a hotbed of socialism. Eugene V. Debs, one of the greatest speakers in the history of our nation, got 1 million votes for president while he was serving time in a federal prison. Terre Haute, Indiana. Read his story. He was a radical socialist worker, standing up for workers' rights, and really built the labor movement. And Indiana was really a very, very left-leaning state for a long time. It needs to lead, we at least need to get back to center, you know. And I don't expect us to start leaning left immediately, but let's try to get it straight up for a while. I don't know, don't look at that image too much. But it's important. And it's time for churches to stand up, as did Bonhoeffer against Hitler. Hitler's movement was Christian nationalism. He literally claimed to be ushering in the kingdom of Christ. Donald Trump quoted him many times in his speeches around the country. Donald Trump said, we will We will build a perfect Reich. In one of his speeches. So this is what we're dealing with. And I don't, religion, churches, and politics, you cannot divide them. You cannot say we leave that all outside anymore. Because if you do, the silence convicts us. If we do not speak out now, our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren will remember whether we did or whether we didn't. And I believe it's time for us to stand up, speak out strongly. This was written back in this was Vonnegut's book, A Man Without a Country, and it's a funny little book. It's kind of the closest thing he ever did to a memoir. And it was during the Bush administration. And he said the last thing, he was 82 years old at this time. He said, "Now I'm 82 years old. Thanks a lot, you dirty rats." Thinking of rats. "The last thing I ever wanted was to be alive when the three most powerful people on the whole planet would be Bush, Dick, and Colin." So or Colin. He had a great sense of humor. I really encourage you to read Vonnegut. But even more this morning, I encourage you to put your feet on the ground. I encourage you to take your kids with you. I encourage you to say to your children, we will fight for your liberty. We will fight for democracy. I don't mean physical fight. I don't mean violence, because I'm a pacifist. But I mean I will resist with every breath I have, every opportunity I have. And if a church cannot do that, it will be remembered. Because a church that does not do that is irrelevant in this age. If all we're coming to do is get together and have good time, sing and fun, do all that, which is all fine. But if that's all we do, we are not being the church. The church has always been the check to the state, and that's what we need to be. Thank you for listening. We're going to sing a song now. Glenda, come here.